Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this audio commentary for the Creepshow television series, the first season. My name is Michael Felsher, and I'm here today with the director of this particular episode, All Hallows Eve, Mr. John Harrison. How are you, sir?
Good, Mike. Glad to be here.
So this one was it roughly number 2 in the list? Because you ended up doing 4 episodes of the show, but you did this one kind of in conjunction with another episode, House of the Head, correct?
Yeah, this was there were 2 stories in each episode, so this was actually the second episode that I did. The first episode I did was Night of the Paw and Hard Times of Muskie Holler, and this was the second one.
Was this one that you were, because when you came down to do the show, you ended up staying and doing a couple of additional episodes that you were beyond what you originally were going to do. With this episode, was this one of the ones that you were originally contracted to come in and do?
No, this was the one they asked me to stay and do.
Oh, this was? Okay, this was the one.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I did Paw and Muskie first when I first got down there, and while I was in prep for those, Greg came to me and said, I want to give you these other 2 and have you look at them and see if you like them. And I did, and so I stayed and went right from the production of the first 2 into prep for these, and then right into production.
And so for those of you who may not have listened to some of the other commentaries we've done, just a little bit of background, your history with Creepshow is interesting in that you worked with George Romero on the original film in a couple of different capacities. You started out, you came in to replace a first assistant director on that show, and then you ended up doing music, which ended up evolving into a full-blown score. Was that an interesting process, and that you kind of what it was like back then, just to sort of show up and say, hey, how can I help? And then what ends up happening is you end up having much more involvement in it than you originally planned.
Well, that was the great thing about that period of time, because independent filmmaking in the Berg was truly independent. And there was a small community of all of us who wanted to be in the business, and we all kind of knew each other. My partners, Pat Buba and Dusty Nelson, and I had worked with George before on other projects. And when Creepshow came up, we had a couple of other ADs that just didn't gel with George that easily. And Richard Rubenstein, the producer, called me up out of the clear blue one day and said, hey, man, what are you doing? I said, nothing. And he said, I want you to come out and be George's AD. And I said, man, I don't know what an AD does. I don't know how to do it or whatever. He said, well, all I really want you to do is be there with George and help things move along. And because you're a filmmaker and you know George, you guys are friends, your communication will be a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I got involved in that. And while we were doing it, we would just talk about what kind of music we were going to have and what we were going to do. And I said, I got some gear. I'm the guy with the piano, so I'll write a few things. And one thing led to the next, and I ended up scoring the whole movie.
And now here it is years later, and you're directing on the Creepshow television series. And it had to have been sort of a very surreal thing at times to realize, boy, it's weird how things come back around again.
It's true. And because George and I used to wander around Los Angeles and try to sell anthology series and genre series, and we couldn't get arrested. And here it is, the mid-20s, or to 2000, well, it's 2020 now. It's like all genre all the time.
Right. Now, All Hallows Eve is interesting to me in that this is not some of the other episodes from the first season tackle what I would call the traditional horror classics, werewolves, vampires, zombies, Monkey's Paw, which was one of the episodes you tackled. This one has a much more atypical structure in that we're with kids and we don't really have an idea where this is going from the onset. What was the appeal of this story to you?
That's exactly what appealed to me, because what I liked about it was the idea that we don't know what's going on with these kids. Are they like juvenile delinquents? Are they just like vandals? Or are they it's Creepshow, so we figure there's going to be some kind of supernatural aspect to this.
Mm-hmm.
But they clearly have this town by the balls, and everybody's afraid of them. But they seem like kind of nice kids.
Right.
And so that was fun to play with.
Well, that's the interesting thing about it, is that when I first watched the episode, I wasn't sure what was It's like clearly something's up and something's wrong, but you like these kids. You don't.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we ended up doing it this way. I should give you a little bit of history here because the original idea was to cast this very young, to cast this as like preteens.
So like 10,
And
11-year-olds, somewhere in that region.
yeah, and do the normal Halloween, everybody's out trick-or-treating. But again, we have limited time and budgets on these things, and this story is set obviously all at night.
Right.
There are labor laws to contend with. And because we're doing 2 stories in each episode, and the second one in this episode was House of the Head, which is also a story about a child, the amount of time that I was allowed to have with young children on the set would have prohibited any real movie making of this. I mean, I don't even think I could have gotten them done in the hours of the day. So we made a decision to cast this show with 18-year-olds that could play younger because 18-year-olds were adults and we didn't have the same labor restrictions.
Right.
In the story, it makes sense when you find out what it's all about. But it was a kind of a controversial decision at the time, and people were like, "Oh, it's not going to have the same charm. It's not going to be, you can see little." And we had to change some jokes and things like that. But you can't have like 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds wandering around and in these goofy costumes. It's just not going to have the same charm. But I thought we cast it really well. These kids turned out to be great. Connor Christie, who plays the sort of the leader of the group, and Madison Thompson, his girlfriend.
Yeah.
And then these two here at the front, Andrew Scott Eckel and Jason Wardlaw, just were. First of all, they became really good friends on the shoot, which was a nice thing. They became a team in and of themselves, and they were so game for everything. So it really worked out. I think it has its own charm now, simply because they're older.
Right. And I do get the sense that these guys have known each other for a long time.
That's the great thing. Yeah.
I mean, these feel like friends who have literally been wandering this neighborhood for ages, going and doing all this, and are just kind of they're tired of this, and they really want this to be over. But again, at this point in the episode, you don't understand the context of why. And you are drawn to their story, but again, I'm a big fan of any story where Creepshow. Some of the stories, even from the original film, from the very beginning how they're going to end. So the destination isn't necessarily the point; it's the journey getting there. Whereas with this one, it's like I don't know what's going on here, and I found that very intriguing.
Yeah, she answers the door, the fellow at the first place, and then this girl answers the door, and you can tell immediately from her expression, it's like, oh my God, they're back.
Right.
And so, but why? And you don't really know.
No.
At the end of this scene, you're beginning to get a sense that they come around every year on Halloween, and they terrorize this town, and they've done things to other kids.
Yeah.
So now you're intrigued. Okay, what's really going on? How's this going to work out? Are we going to find out that these kids are actually some kind of monster in human form?
Right.
Or are they just really evil demons? We don't know yet. This guy, the father, comes in and completely, just is so horrified by them and what they did to him, and they're just mocking him. So now you're starting to feel a little bit differently about these kids.
Yeah, and it's each visit that they make changes your expectations of them a little bit. It changes their perception of who they are. And
that was the challenge of the piece.
Yeah. Talk about the script. It was written by writer Bruce Jones, I believe, wrote it. And
yes, Bruce Jones wrote it. And he and I had a couple of conversations about their backstory, because when we had to make this decision, their backstory had to change slightly. But he was very supportive of it. And I liked the script from the beginning, and I grew to like it even more after we made this change, and he was very supportive of it.
Now you're working with Rob Draper, who came in to do DP work on the entire series, and you would work with him before on the Tales from the Dark Side show back in the 80s, and then later on with Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. So you two were very simpatico already, and were able to hit the ground running with this. This episode is almost, with the exception of, one or two scenes inside the houses, a lot of exterior work here, which is always going to be a challenge. What was the challenge in getting some of these more complex shots and just shooting outdoors in Atlanta at that particular time?
Well, again, when you have a great crew, and in a situation like this, you've asked me in the past, why do I like anthologies and why do I like short form stories?
Hmm.
Because you can create something really different with each one,
Hmm.
and you can then enlist the crew to help you make that. So, and that goes for the production designers all the way down to the grips who have to figure out how can I rig a camera to get the shot that you want. And so I would say that, yes, this was a huge challenge because we had to double time. We had to shoot at night with this group and then shoot during the day with House of the Head on
Mm.
stage. So we had to really be buttoned up and we really had to know what we were going for. But Rob knew exactly how to light it. We could pre-light it, and the crew just humped and just got us the stuff. It was cold. It was kind of hard to really get all the coverage we needed. But the producers were very supportive, and we ended up doing it. But I got to hand it to the crew because without them, uh, we wouldn't have been able to get it. We wouldn't have been able to cover it as much as we did.
So where was this neighborhood, and what was it like shooting there? With, I mean, obviously the whole neighborhood would have to be in on what's going on, and certainly allowing you guys to be there and shooting it, in front of several of the houses. How did the neighborhood react to you guys filming there?
Well, they were really supportive. It's I forget the actual name of the neighborhood. It was in the east side of Atlanta, and they were very supportive. We had to run around to different houses and actually get people to let us go in the house. There's a scene here where people are looking out the windows,
Hmm.
and they weren't part of the set like this house. This house allowed us to come in, and I love this sequence because
Yeah.
Rob, he said, "Did you ever see that movie Night of the Hunter?" And it's like, "Yeah."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why don't we do something like that? And so this is our homage to Charles Lawton and Night of the Hunter.
Yeah, the actress playing the mother, she's fantastic because you just really see
Fantastic.
how scared she is of this whole thing, and
And then she gives up and becomes completely like, oh, there's nothing we can do.
mhm.
Just go along with them. They're gonna kill you. Go ahead. I can't do. I'm tired of this.
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, that's interesting because again, you very slowly reveal different stages of the people in the neighborhood. People who are just like, I don't know about these kids, to people who are angry at them, to people who are scared to death of them, and then ones who are sympathetic and just tired of the fact that they're living with this burden that has just enshrouded the whole neighborhood.
Yeah, there are a lot of classic stories about the different nights, and of course, The Purge made a whole. They've made however many movies on the whole idea of this. That there is one night in the life of a town or a city or a country where everything goes to shit,
Hmm.
and everybody knows it's coming, and it's that one day where you have to just like live with it. And this is the night in this town. They know these kids are coming, and it's kind of a cool concept.
I would like to take an opportunity to discuss. Obviously, when you're doing shows like this, you're going to have an opportunity to put in a lot of Easter eggs for the fans. We just saw. If
Yeah,
you look on the stand sitting next to her is the ashtray, which featured prominently in the first movie and all of the episodes, and is in every episode of this show,
it
in one
is.
one way or the other. Earlier on, I believe we saw the voodoo doll, the famous voodoo doll,
Yes, the
and
famous voodoo doll.
yeah. So, I mean, did you enjoy? Did you have? Were there moments on the set of just any of the episodes where you were just like, we could put this in here, and I think people really dig it.
Well, it was kind of like a running gag. Like, where are we going to put it? Everybody knew. Every episode we were going to put wonderful Easter eggs in it. And so it was just a fun thing to constantly think about. And Lucas, our prop master, was ingenious about how to do it. He would create miniatures of the real things. He would find variations on them so that we could I mean, he made that voodoo doll. I don't know
really?
where the original is, so that Joe Hill used in the original movie, or Joe King. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, but he would come up with these things, and then it was just a lot of fun to say, well, why don't we get it into this scene? And sometimes it was more fun to put them in where you weren't pointing an arrow at it,
Right, right. I mean,
so that the audience had to find it.
right, and well, we'll certainly talk quite a bit of that in House of the Head, which is just loaded with moments like that.
Yeah,
But and
exactly.
here's the final scene where we come to understand exactly what happened and why these kids are doing what they're doing. And when you're dealing with violence towards kids and horrible thing, how tricky was it for you to sell that where it wasn't where it wasn't too much of a dramatic load for this episode to carry?
Well, the story sells itself, really. I mean, these kids, now you're going to see what exactly happened. They've tied this kid up and they're going to set him on fire. But why are they going
Right.
to do that? Well, now we're going to find out. And it was a lot of fun to do this scene because our little crew here were, as you said earlier, they just played like they'd known each other for years. They had this little clubhouse.
Yeah.
They were having such a great time. And then you find out that, like all bullies, they show up and they do something and they don't really realize the consequences of what they're going to do.
Right.
And they have set this whole thing in motion. So the violence, to some extent, is completely justified.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's at the end of the day, you certainly understand why they are the way they are. And this, I do give credit though that the bully is not as one-dimensional as it would be in some other stories. I mean, he's a creep and he's an asshole and he deserves what he gets, but you do feel like, oh, he knew he screwed up and he did feel genuine remorse for what happened.
Yeah, and probably all of these people did. But these guys, our little crew, are living in an eternity. They have a mission, a classic horror story. They can't be at rest until justice is served.
Yeah.
And so each one of these kids, these bad guys, year after year, have had to be disposed of.
Right. Yeah. And then the decision to shoot the flashback in black and white and then add the yellow of the fire, was that something you planned from the onset?
Oh yeah. That was a deliberate thing. And then of course we have another fire gag here. I did one in Night of the Paw, and these are all very tricky to do. But our stunt coordinators and everybody had it down. This is a real guy. I mean,
Yeah.
we really set the guy on fire, not him.
No.
This is just but all of this is a real guy.
Yeah, you can tell.
And
yeah.
it was, you're always nervous when you do shots like this because stunts can go wrong. But this didn't, fortunately. And then we repurposed, for those of you who watched Night of the Paw, we had a cemetery in Night of the Paw that was on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is one scene that climaxes this show. And we repurposed the cemetery. I don't think it looks at all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Amy Holberg, our production designer, was able to repurpose it in a way that really made it work for us. But this is just a really touching moment. And
Yeah.
when they finally say what's happening, and now they're not going to see each other anymore.
Yeah, out of all the episodes that were done for this first season, this one is definitely what I would call the most emotionally affecting of them all. I think this is definitely the one where you really get that it's the biggest tragedy that the show has in
Yes.
the first season.
This was Shudder TV's favorite episode when they read it, or at least that's what I was told.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were all on our P's and Q's to make sure that we lived up to their expectations because they loved this episode. And with all the production problems that we may have encountered and thought, well, maybe we should find a different episode. No, they wanted it, so I heard that they were very happy with it. And I love this moment when we finally see who little Skeeter is.
Yeah.
And he's just this cute little boy.
Yeah, and it's very heartrending. And these kids are, it's like, all right, we're done. We're now going to essentially rest. And it's
Well, this is something that I talked Bruce into thinking about because the fact that these two were brothers was not in the original script.
Okay.
But I thought that it brought an emotional heaviness to this that I liked a lot. And he agreed with it, and so we went with that. And then they just kind of all vanish.
And there's All Hallows Eve, and another successful entry into the Creepshow mythos. Congratulations on the well done job there, John.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I enjoyed it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the special audio commentary for this segment of this episode of the Creepshow TV series, The Man in the Suitcase. My name is Michael Felsher with Red Shirt Pictures, and I'm here today with the director of this particular segment, Mr. David Bruckner. How are you, sir?
Hello. Very good. Very good.
So we are into Man in the Suitcase. This is one of 2 episodes you directed for the show, correct?
That's correct. I was the companion in this one. That's the Atlanta airport right there. I'm from Atlanta, so it's fun to.
Oh, you're from
shoot the South Terminal.
so
Yeah.
Yeah, you were familiar with everything then. So how did you get involved? How did you come into the Creepshow fold, as it were?
Well, I have a long history of working on anthology horror films. I've done 3 anthology movies: The Signal, VHS, and Southbound. And over the years, I've really grown to love short form horror. You're not really burdened with carrying the third act of a horror film, which can usually be super challenging. You can kind of, I like to say, you can get in late and get out early. And a lot of really creepy, fantastic ideas are, they really feel like they're punctuated on a single beat. And that this is a really satisfying format to explore horror. So big fan of Creepshow. Grew up on the first 2 films. I think the second film scarred me the most as a young guy. So particularly Thanks for the Ride, Lady.
Oh, yeah.
So when I heard they were doing this series, I was all on it and took as many meetings as I could, and ultimately got an email from Greg Nicotero who said, we are cut from the same cloth, when he had looked at my work and said, we'd love to talk to you. And I've been a big fan of Greg's for a long time, and great respect for his career and what he's been able to accomplish. So it was a real honor to jump on.
So in terms of this particular story, when did you first come into contact with this script, and what did you think of it?
Of all the scripts, this was one that I felt I just had a handle on from the jump. The tone of it was so specific, and I love that area where it's funny, but it's dark, and you're kind of satirizing, the misfortune of several characters. And I loved the dark turn and where it went. I loved the absurdity of it, and basically begged the producers to let me take a crack at it.
What's that got to do with anything?
And did you have any input, or did you talk to the writer, Christopher Buhlman, at all?
Script was, I think Greg and Buhlman had been through the process, and I think when I came on, it was moving so quick. The script was pretty much, it was close to final draft. I don't think any changes that we made on it were production oriented. Because you're out, you're scouting locations, you're learning new things, you're developing new opportunities, and sometimes you got to switch things around and kind of adapt pretty quickly on your feet. Should be said, these Creepshow episodes are shot very quickly. There's, I think, 3.5 days per episode. So, you have to maneuver in the best way that you can and ultimately make choices.
Let's talk about some of your cast. We're going to start off with Will playing Justin here. Now, this character is interesting to me in that, as I watched this episode, my sympathy for him shifted at several key points. There's many times where you're like, I think I would react the same way as he does, and then there's times where you're like, oh no, I would never do that, and then it comes back around where you're like, well, okay, maybe I can understand. So it's an interesting sort of tightrope for him to walk. What was it like working with Will and developing this character?
I mean, this guy had a handle on it from the jump. He just has a natural instinct for comedy, understands the rhythm, great to work with, pays attention, interested in the process. I couldn't have asked for a better lead, and really understood the plight of the lead and the idea that, the lead character is not the biggest character. Some of the other characters are sort of, going for larger jokes. They're taking different kinds of risks, but the tone is often set by the lead. And shout outs too here to Amy Holmberg, our production designer, and our, the entire art department, because they really captured the tone of the apartment. I mean, it feels comic book to me, even before we cut to the obvious comic book frames and panels.
Right.
It feels like, almost like a comic panel, nightmare of what you would imagine a college apartment to be like. It's just a little zany, which I love.
Well, like even the patterning on the couch looks like the shock backgrounds a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You just
Absolutely.
got it's stylized just enough.
Mm-hmm. Finding material for this television was interesting. I think some of that changed in the edit room, but yeah, it was always part of the story that he was watching porn and then getting little hints of what was to come, both in the counting of the cash and then the genie. So here's the first movement of the suitcase. The suitcase is often puppeteered on fishing line. Mm-hmm. Or there's somebody who's just off camera reaching over and giving it a good shake. It's old school, as you can imagine.
As George Carlin would say, high tech shit.
Yeah.
But again, you got 3 days and a couple of bucks. You got to get it done no matter what way you can.
Absolutely. But I love the slow building of suspense here, the idea of first introducing that there's a man in the suitcase, which it's fun too, because the audience knows it's coming. Obviously, it's in the title. And
right.
It's always a question of, how big do you play it? Do you keep it as kind of a creepy curiosity, or do you go for shock and where and how to parse those beats necessarily?
When I like the idea of, this is all the episodes of Creepshow, or at least most of them, deal with classic horror tropes or, vintage monsters. This one deals with sort of a lesser used one, the genie or the djinn, so to speak. What was the appeal about tackling that subgenre of horror for you?
Well, I think there was something fresh about it, and it's also, you don't know that it's going to come to that. You really, throughout the course of this episode, both tonally and as coming out of the circumstance, you just kind of don't have any idea what you're in for, which I think just makes for a fun time. So that's Ravi Naidu, total champion in the suitcase. And there was, I first experimented with the suitcase with the K&B team in Los Angeles. They had come up with a lot of great ideas of how to kind of bend the torso, and most of that is a prosthetic, but what you're looking at there that's Ravi's head, and that's Ravi's left arm, and there is a hole cut out in the stage, and he is kind of, I believe he's on a weight bench of sorts that has him propped up into the suitcase, and his right arm, which is bent behind his head, which hopefully we intuitively know on some level is an impossible contortion.
Yeah.
Is actually the hand of one of our second team actors. I forget his name at the moment, but he's winging it. So we're rolling all this super quick. So as Ravi's going through the lines, all this performative acting in the right hand is this poor gentleman. Completely underground, can't see anything, has no idea what's going on above him, and he's just riffing with Ravi. So it's really a collaboration between these two, and it had us falling apart on set. I think literally every time the camera cut, we just broke into laughter.
Well, and it's incredibly effective because the profile, what we're seeing of him, is so twisted and wrong. You're uncomfortable just looking at him.
Yeah, that's the idea. I'm always fascinated that, in the fact that we have parts of our brain that understand and recognize the human form, and we're so used to looking at people that if you alter it just a little bit to one degree or another, then you get this kind of uncanny, uncomfortable, even somewhat quirky sensation. And that's what we're after with this, is a sense of wrongness.
How long was Ravi stuck in that setup on a given day?
Probably longer than he should have been. I think he was great because we were short on time, and for him to get in and out of the suitcase took quite a bit. So there was a certain cost to break. So we would just kind of get set up and put 2 cameras on it and go for it. But he was, I might guess, maybe 45 minutes, hour and a half, somewhere in there at a time. And I should say too that one of the things about this episode from the jump that I loved was the opportunity to, how to situate the straight character. The character who is the least absurd of the group. And, often with comedy, it's like the audience relates to that character as other characters make more and more foolish decisions around them. And I thought what was really interesting about the scene is that the man in the suitcase is the straight man.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he's in this amazing predicament, his health really depends on whether or not these foolish college kids can get their shit together and not take advantage of him and help get him out of the suitcase. So,
Right.
he's under the peril of their bad decision making, and I just thought that was deeply funny.
And of course, there's just the pun of him being the straight man. That's just funny.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we originally did a whole VFX shot where the suitcase was then lifted up off the floor and you saw that there was carpet underneath it. The thinking is that it would just be effortless in that way so that you can always kind of maintain the illusion that he's actually in the suitcase. But I think the shot fell apart because we had gone back and altered his position in the suitcase. And we, for whatever reason, it affected our coverage and we couldn't use it. So I love these slow creeping beats. I think when you have a really good concept like this and you don't know where it's going, you can kind of take a moment to kind of sit with it. There's plenty for the audience to think about. And here we go with the first dream sequence. This was my first time as a film director getting to play with actual squibs.
Oh, really? Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think we've done a lot of gunshots in my time, but also so much is done with VFX these days, and there's such a delightful old school approach to Creepshow, and I think that was Greg's ambition from the jump, and you really see all different departments in filmmaking just get super excited about doing it the old way.
And you have Big Boy here.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, like growing up in Atlanta, the opportunity to work with Big Boy and being a big fan of Outkast. I mean, this is almost historic. He was wonderful, by the way. 2 takes, took direction well. I got the sense he was having a blast with it.
It seems like most of the actors you work with really came to play. They understood exactly what they were there to do and what kind of material this was.
Yeah, I think I think it's just an opportunity for them to have a blast. Ian Gregg here playing Alex, the kind of evil, opportunistic friend.
Right.
Ian and I are pals after this, so I think I can say that he just naturally embodies a little bit of Alex. I think from the jump, you can kind of see him calculating, trying to find an angle. This was actually, we resituated the script for this location because we were short on time. And this conversation used to happen at a restaurant, and we had to do it on a picnic table outside one of our other locations. And so we just populated it with a few extras. That's I think a random park just outside this building here. Little glimpse of Creepshow magazines there in the trash can. And here we introduce Madison Bailey, who plays Carla.
I told you I was coming to get my stuff.
What's wrong?
It's an interesting dynamic between these 3 people and how they get along and how the power shifts at times from one or the other. How did they get along on the set? Were they pretty tight, or did they just sort of keep their distance from each other, or how did it go?
Oh, no, there was a really great camaraderie, especially between the 3 college kids from the jump. And again, I think they were just down for it. They knew this was going to be crazy. They knew it was going to be fast. We're going to be moving at a breakneck pace, but that it was like really, really funny, and that they were going to have a lot of opportunities to feed off one another. And so it was really fun for me to take a moment and just pull them aside and run the scenes and play around with the humor and how it would work, and then kind of set them loose in front of the camera. We also have, there's a lot, it's deceptive because it seems like broad comedy in one sense, but you also, because it's short form, you're trying to convey a lot of information quick, she's Justin's girlfriend, Alex is the roommate, but he has designs on her. There's a dynamic there from the jump. Alex and Justin are instantly pitted against one another, and so everything from the blocking to tiny looks between them is, we're trying to make some of that come across in a really, really effortless way.
In terms of balancing the humor and the horror of an episode like this, what was the challenge for you? Because obviously it's very, very funny, the inherent setup here. And yet you have to believe in this poor guy's pain and his predicament. So if you tip too far one way or the other, the episode might not work. As a director, how did you figure out the correct balance of the humor and the horror for this?
Well, I think the script sort of set the stage, particularly with some of the money-making montages and whatnot, that, you have to leave a little bit of room for the comedy to be big, and I think as long as you know what you're sending up in those comic beats, it's like we're making fun of their opportunism. The joke ultimately is on them, and when you know what you're making fun of, you can run with it a little bit more. You can turn the dial up on how far you're going to go. Where the horror is concerned, really just, I sort of figured this was an episode that would come out in the middle of the run. It would stand apart from some of the more obviously horrific episodes in a sense, and that, the audience would bring some expectation to the table. It's like they know this is going to go terribly wrong. You basically promised something scary is going to happen, and the wrongness of the man in the suitcase, although it's a little bit funny, it's also uncomfortable, and it just kind of feeds your expectation of what that final jolt is ultimately going to be. So,
yeah, I love this montage where you see our three characters basically turning into absolute dicks, worthy of their comeuppance at the end.
Shout out to our editor Patrick, who really made some great discoveries in this montage. There was as is usually the case, there was a lot more we wanted to do with it, but you're kind of short on time. And now that machine, I had no idea what that was. That's like some kind of retro weight loss device that Greg was determined to find, to his credit. And I didn't think they'd come across it. And our department showed up one day with that thing, and we were like, oh, fantastic, we're going to get to do this. So here's the betrayal, of course.
Yep.
I love these little oneers here. One guy running out, the other guy stepping forward, and we reveal the transition. That's a hell of a bag of weed.
Yeah, God, yeah. I mean, Jesus.
Yep.
That's a lot of coins they must have coughed up for that.
This was a blast. This was another big oneer that we stretched out. Just kind of telling you the entire story of how far it's come. Again, fun choices, how far to go with the mechanic of having him make money. I'm not really sure what that mechanism is that he's flipping there. I think it has some industrial purpose.
That's what you said before you turned.
When in doubt, hook him up to a car battery. Ugh. Man.
No.
And again, too, I don't think you expect the horror to come from the college students.
Yeah, after this episode was over, I mean, I was so impressed with Ravi's work in this part. Just what he was able to do with barely being able to turn his head and the motion of apparently just one arm. I mean, you feel an enormous amount of sympathy for the guy, but then when it's revealed at the end what was going on, you're like, man, he could really carry off the threat and the imposing nature as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an interesting turn because seconds before that, he's assuming that he deserves it.
Yeah.
Which seems to allude to an even higher moral purpose. He's someone who's maybe has his own sins in a sense, and I just thought that was really, really interesting before he turns into the Djinn.
Why is he still talking?
Will you say a few words about working with your DP, Rob Draper, who did all the other episodes on the show and had worked with Greg and John Harrison and those guys before and had a long history with them? What was it like working with Rob?
Well, first of all, big fan of Tales from the Dark Side. And,
Oh, yeah.
Great honor to go into it with Rob. But he had a handle on the aesthetic from the jump, and I'm, working with wide-angle lenses. And even though we shot 2 cameras, we talked about it as kind of a single camera approach.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the visuals to this we owe to Rob, and his handle on that was something that for me was fun to adapt to. It's kind of a collaboration in the sense because he's maintaining the uncanny kind of aesthetic of Creepshow and keeping an eye on that, and then I'm getting to do my thing a little bit, like these these little embedded oneers, which I think drop you into the situation a bit. Credit to our crew there. It was late in the hour. We rolled that wrench hit once, and the blood did not drizzle down his face nearly as well, and I thought we were out of time. And figured we needed to move on. And every once in a while, as a director, you're kind of like, okay, guys, I think we got to go. And you have a couple keys come over to you and just say, like, do it again. Just give it one more try. Like, we've got the time, I promise. And so we rolled it again and, got a really stellar shot out of it.
That's what we do.
Well, that's what I've heard from so many of the other directors on the show is that the crew really, I mean, considering the amount of time and the pressure you were under, the crew really stepped up and helped deliver.
They were extremely passionate, and filmmaking's never easy, but, in time this tight, it can be pretty harrowing. And it's always great when everybody believes in the material and you can tell, despite everything that we're under, they're having a blast. And they, and for us, directors come in and, we get a little bit of time to prep and we jump on set and these folks are with it the entire time. And they've been planning for, weeks and months even what some of these set pieces are going to look like. And so they're invested and they want to see it turn out. And so you do your best to service all those ideas.
And now we're getting close to the revelation of the Djinn. Now, talk about working with Kara Jones and the getting this creature puppeteered and how it was all put together.
I'm sorry, I just have to comment on that air blast. That was it was quite a comical mechanism to bring into the room. You have to kind of shut everything down, and the actors were, good sports. This is basically like a huge fan that hits him in the face at once. Carrie had a great grasp on this. Him and I worked probably in more detail on the companion. With this, the trick was, how do we get him up into position and what can we add to it given the limitations of the suit and the fact that he can kind of only open his jaw. Like, can we render a sense of judgment in the character? Again, he had a great grasp on that from the beginning.
So as we begin to start the process of wrapping things up here, when did you finally see the final episode all put together, and what did you think, and what's it been like hearing the reaction to it?
It's been great. I mean, horror fans are typically very vocal, particularly on the web. I mean, that's always been the case. So I always feel like there's no shortage of feedback in what they're seeing. And again, I think the enthusiasm and the love for Creepshow is something that, we've seen a lot of. And the response was great. I didn't see the final. I was there for most of the edit and some of the final details and tweaks that come together. I was off on another project for, so I got to see it ultimately come together on Shudder, which is not uncommon. I love this ending. I love where we end up, the row of suitcases. And again, Ravi and Nassim here, who plays our greeter, I think land the tone perfectly.
Yeah.
Of two parties in on the joke.
Yeah, they know what's up.
Now, I should say, I really wanted that conveyor belt to move.
Yeah.
And suck both the suitcases up into the mechanism, wherever the hell it is that suitcases go in an airport. But we were not allowed to turn it on. And we begged and pleaded. So it goes with filmmaking.
So I guess, David, basically just a final statement from you on being involved in Creepshow's inaugural season and what it's like to have had a part in reviving horror history, so to speak.
Reviving horror history. I mean, it's hard to think of it that way when you're kind of down in the trenches, but I had an absolute blast. And as a horror guy and a guy who continues to make horror, it's a great honor to be a part of it. And I'm just so happy the entire season turned out, and I can't wait to see what they do next.
Thanks, David, for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.